The morning came too early, as mornings always did in the mountains. Ash Remington woke to unfamiliar weight pressing against her skin, to scents that made no sense, to silence where there should have been the familiar creak of her quarters. Her body ached in places she couldn't name. Her mind held nothing but fragments, smoke and shadow where memory should have lived. She opened her eyes to stone walls, to luxury she'd never known, to a room that belonged to someone far above her station. The Alpha's quarters. Panic arrived like ice water. She sat up too fast, and the world tilted. Her shoulders screamed protest, wrapped tight in clean bandages that hadn't been there before. Blood stained the sheets beneath her, rusty brown against expensive fabric. Her clothing was gone, replaced by a shirt that swallowed her frame, carrying the unmistakable scent of pine and gunpowder, and something purely male. Cole Mackenzie's scent. Her wolf stirred for the first time in her life with real force, pressing against her ribs with a single word that made no sense. Mate. The sensation was foreign, overwhelming, impossible to ignore. Her wolf had always been quiet, small, present, but never demanding. Now it howled inside her chest with certainty she couldn't comprehend. Ash forced herself to stand, legs shaking beneath her weight. 8 hours missing from her memory, her body marked in ways that spoke of violence, of desperation, of something she couldn't quite grasp. She found her boots near the door, laced with efficiency that wasn't hers. Found a note on the bedside table, handwriting she recognized from mission briefings. Stay until 0800. Guard outside will escort you. We'll debrief at 1400. Mackenzie. The formality cut deeper than it should have. No explanation. No warmth. Just protocol, as cold and distant as the man himself. But the ink smudged near his name, black bleeding into paper like he'd paused too long, hand trembling with something he wouldn't name. Ash dressed in silence, every movement deliberate. 22 years old today, though no one would remember. No one ever did. She'd learned early that invisibility was safer than attention, that quiet competence kept her alive in a pack that had never quite accepted the orphaned daughter of a fallen Marine. The guard outside said nothing when she emerged at precisely 800 hours. He was young, uncomfortable, eyes skating away from hers like she carried disease. Word traveled fast in Blackwood. Whatever had happened last night, the pack already knew, already judged. She walked through corridors she'd cleaned 1,000 times, past warriors who'd never learned her name. The morning sun cut through high windows, painting everything in shades of gold that felt like lies. Beautiful morning. Wrong morning. Morning that made no sense with the weight in her chest and the howling of her wolf and the certainty that everything had changed. Cole Mackenzie stood on the shooting range when the sun was barely over the tree line. 500 rounds through his sidearm, and his hands still shook. The recoil barely registered anymore, absorbed into muscle memory built over 20 years of service. Marine Recon didn't teach you to feel. It taught you to function, to complete the mission, to ignore the screaming of your body and the breaking of your mind and the voice inside that begged you to stop. His wolf wasn't screaming now. It was singing, low and satisfied and utterly convinced of something Cole refused to accept. The bond thrummed under his skin like electricity, connecting him to a woman sleeping in his quarters, a woman he'd claimed in a moment of weakness that might destroy everything he'd built. 8 hours ago, she'd been dying. 8 hours ago, his wolf had made a choice his mind never would have permitted. 8 hours ago, everything had gone to hell, and Cole had no one to blame but himself. He fired until the magazine ran dry, then reloaded with movements older than thought. The burn scar on his right hand ached in the cold morning air, phantom pain from wounds a decade old. He'd pulled Serena's body from the flames with these hands, had crushed her throat with these same fingers, had learned that love was just another word for leverage, and he'd been weak enough to give his enemies the weapon they needed to tear his pack apart. 43 dead. He remembered every name, every face, every family left behind. The pack had forgiven him eventually, in the way packs forgave necessary leaders. They followed him, respected him, feared him. But they didn't love him, and Cole had learned to prefer it that way. Love got people killed. Distance kept them safe. Ash Remington was dangerous precisely because she made him want to close that distance. He'd noticed her months ago, watching from the ramparts as she trained the young scouts. Moving through the pack like smoke, present but not seen, competent, but never acknowledged. She had her father's eyes, hazel and sharp, missing nothing. Captain James Remington had died holding a position against 12 hostiles, buying time for civilians to evacuate. Cole had read the after-action report, had authorized the death benefits, had watched a 10-year-old girl stand at her father's funeral with dry eyes and clenched fists, already learning that tears changed nothing. 12 years later, she'd grown into someone who made Cole's carefully constructed walls feel like paper. The bond had started the night before, during chaos he'd barely controlled. Ash had volunteered for a solo reconnaissance run, checking reports of rogue activity on the southern border. The senior scouts had dismissed the threat. Cole should have too. Should have sent a full team if he'd sent anyone at all. Should have done anything except what he did, which was respond personally when her distress call cut through the radio with the sound of gunfire and her voice, steady despite the terror underneath, reporting contact with 8 hostiles and requesting immediate extraction. Alphas didn't respond to scout emergencies. They sent teams. They maintained command and control. They didn't grab the first 5 wolves they could find and race toward the sound of violence with their hearts in their throats. But Cole's wolf had recognized something his mind refused to acknowledge, had driven him toward her with single-minded purpose that overrode every protocol he'd ever written, had known, with certainty beyond reason, that losing her would break something fundamental inside him. He'd found her surrounded, bleeding, fighting with knife and tooth against odds that should have killed her minutes ago. The rogues wore coordinated gear, moved with military precision, targeted her with focus that spoke of planning and intelligence he didn't want to examine. This wasn't random. This was assassination. Cole had killed 3 before they knew he'd arrived. His team had taken 4 more in the opening seconds. The last rogue, a female with silver eyes and a smile carved from cruelty, had gone for Ash's throat with claws extended and death in her gaze. Cole had taken the strike meant for her. 4 lines of fire across his chest, deep enough to scar, painful enough to trigger the rage he'd spent years learning to control. His wolf had surged forward with berserker fury, destroying the threat, then turning toward Ash as she collapsed against a tree, blood soaking through her tactical vest from wounds he couldn't count. She was dying. He could smell it, the copper sweetness of too much blood loss, the failing rhythm of her heartbeat. His medic was working frantically, but even enhanced healing had limits. Even wolves could bleed out if the damage was severe enough. His wolf had made a decision without consulting him. The bite was instinct, primal, undeniable. Mark the mate, claim the bond, trigger the healing that came with recognition. Cole's human mind had watched in horror as his body moved without permission, teeth sinking into Ash's shoulder, wolf saliva carrying the chemical markers that would rewrite her biology, bind her to him in ways that couldn't be severed without killing them both. She'd gasped, body arching, then gone limp as the bond snapped into place like a physical thing. Her wounds had stopped bleeding. Her heartbeat had steadied. The color had returned to her face as the mate bond flooded her system with healing factors that shouldn't have existed, biological impossibilities that science couldn't explain and wolves didn't question. Cole had saved her life by claiming her soul. He'd carried her back to base in silence, listening to his team's careful lack of comment. They'd seen. They'd understood. By morning, every wolf in Blackwood would know that their alpha had taken a mate in the field during combat, with all the romance of a battlefield amputation. He'd put her in his quarters because leaving her in medical would have invited questions he couldn't answer. Had stayed with her until he was certain she'd survive. Had watched her sleep with his hand hovering over hers, wanting to touch, terrified to close that final distance. Had written a note with shaking hands because speaking would have required him to find words that didn't exist. Then he'd fled to the range and tried to shoot the feeling out of his chest. It didn't work. It never worked. But the familiar weight of the gun and the controlled violence of the trigger pull gave him something to do with his hands besides reach for her. The sun climbed higher. Cole's communicator buzzed with the accumulated weight of command. Council meeting at 9, supply requisition at 10, training review at 11. The endless machinery of leadership ground forward whether he was ready or not. He holstered his weapon, collected the spent brass out of habit, and turned toward the administrative building with shoulders set against the day ahead. Ash Remington was somewhere behind him, waking to a reality she hadn't chosen. Cole Mackenzie was walking away from her, choosing duty over the howling of his wolf, choosing distance over the dangerous possibility of connection. It was what he did best, what he'd always done, what had kept his pack alive for 8 years. He told himself it was enough. His wolf called him a liar. The bond between them hummed with potential and pain, stretching thin across the space he was determined to maintain. Morning light painted Blackwood in shades of gold and shadow, beautiful and merciless, illuminating everything Cole wished he could leave in darkness. Ash spent the morning learning to function around the bond. It sat beneath her sternum like a second heartbeat, connecting her to a man who'd saved her life and then abandoned her to wake alone. She could feel him, distant and deliberately so, a presence at the edge of her awareness that made her wolf restless and her human mind furious. The pack moved around her with new awareness. Eyes tracked her progress through corridors, measuring, judging, calculating what it meant that the Iceman had claimed the invisible Analyst. Some faces showed curiosity, others showed resentment, none showed welcome. She'd expected that, had lived with it for 12 years. Being Captain Remington's daughter had bought her entry to Blackwood, but it hadn't bought her acceptance. Half-human blood marked her as weak in eyes that valued purity of lineage over competence of character. Her small frame and late shift had confirmed their prejudices. That she'd made herself useful through intelligence work rather than combat prowess had sealed her status as useful but unimportant. Now she was the Alpha's mate, and useful had just become complicated. Ash made her way to the Intelligence Center, a converted basement that housed the pack's surveillance equipment and analysis stations. Her domain, her sanctuary. The one place where her value was undeniable because the senior warriors didn't understand pattern analysis or logistics tracking or the 1,000 small details that kept a pack functioning. The day crawled forward with agonizing slowness. Ash buried herself in work, reviewing mission logs, cross-referencing patrol reports, losing herself in patterns that made sense when nothing else did. Sarah worked beside her in comfortable silence, asking no questions, offering quiet support that Ash appreciated more than words could express. The evening brought a peculiar kind of exhaustion, the type that came from functioning through trauma while pretending everything was normal. Ash had attended the afternoon debrief with Cole, endured his cold formality, accepted his clinical explanation of the bond as if it were just another mission parameter. She'd nodded in all the right places, agreed to his suggestions about safety protocols, and left feeling more alone than she had waking up in his quarters. Now, as sunset painted the Intelligence Center in shades of amber and shadow, she found herself staring at mission logs that refused to make sense. Something about yesterday's attack nagged at her. The coordination, the targeting, the fact that rogues had known exactly where she'd be. Sarah looked up from her monitors, dark eyes going wide with concern. The younger woman was 20, half Vietnamese and fully wolf, one of the few people in Blackwood who'd treated Ash like a person rather than a problem. She opened her mouth, closed it, then apparently decided direct was better than dancing. "Are you okay?" The question carried more weight than its words suggested. Ash appreciated the honesty. "I'm alive. That's more than I expected 2 nights ago." Sarah's gaze dropped to the bandage visible at Ash's collar, then quickly away. "The entire pack knows. About the bond. About what happened. I assumed they would." Ash settled into her station, calling up the previous day's reports with practiced efficiency. "Does it change anything?" Sarah considered that, fingers drumming against her desk in rhythm with thoughts she was organizing. "For you? Everything. The pack can't dismiss you now. You're not just the analyst. You're the Alpha's mate. That gives you protection, authority, status you didn't have yesterday. And resentment. Don't forget that part." "Yeah." Sarah's voice went quiet. "That too. Half the pack thinks you manipulated him somehow. The other half thinks he made a mistake and is too proud to admit it." "What do you think?" "I think." Sarah paused, choosing words carefully. "I think Cole Mackenzie doesn't make mistakes in the field, and I think you nearly died yesterday doing a job that senior scouts should have handled. And I think it's interesting that no one's asking why you were out there alone in the first place." Ash's fingers stilled on her keyboard. She hadn't thought about that, too focused on survival and confusion and the bond humming under her skin. But Sarah was right. The intelligence had suggested low probability of contact. The senior scouts had dismissed it as not worth full team deployment. They'd authorized her solo run, something they rarely did. something that had seemed like rare trust but now tasted like something else. "Pull the mission authorization. I want to see who signed off." Sarah's hands were already moving, calling up files with quick efficiency. She pulled up the documents, and they both stared at the signature line. Senior Scout Commander Garrett Hayes. Ash knew him. Everyone did. 35 years old, former Army Ranger, good reputation for tactical work. He'd been passed over for promotion 6 months ago when Cole had restructured the intelligence division and elevated Ash to senior analyst. She'd thought nothing of it at the time. Competence should be rewarded regardless of feelings. But Garrett had been cold ever since, his courtesy precise and his cooperation minimal. Had that been enough for sabotage? For attempted murder? Could be coincidence. Sarah's voice carried doubt even as she offered the explanation. Could be he genuinely thought the threat was minimal. Could be. Ash started pulling related files, looking for patterns, comparing Garrett's recent authorizations against incident reports. Or could be someone wanted me out of the way, and 2 nights ago was convenient opportunity. She pulled up casualty reports from the Serena incident, cross-referencing names with current pack members. One name stood out. Victor Kane, former pack member, lost his mate Isabella during the Red Winter Night attack. Blamed Cole for bringing the enemy into their midst. Went rogue shortly after, took a handful of followers, had been spotted occasionally on the borders but never engaged directly. Could Victor be connected to this? Could Garrett? Or could be someone wanted me out of the way, and yesterday was convenient opportunity. The evidence would tell them. Evidence always did, if you looked hard enough. Ash had built her reputation on finding patterns others missed, on seeing connections in data that seemed random to untrained eyes. She'd learned early that survival meant being smarter than the people who wanted you gone. If Garrett had tried to kill her, she'd prove it. If someone else had used him, she'd find them. And if the attack had been random bad luck, she'd know that too. But her instincts, honed through 12 years of being unwelcome, whispered that nothing about yesterday had been random. She worked through this morning, building timelines, cross-referencing communications, tracking the small inconsistencies that added up to larger pictures. Sarah worked beside her in comfortable silence, pulling data without needing instruction. By noon, they had something that looked uncomfortably like a pattern. Garrett had authorized 7 solo scout missions in the past 3 months. 4 had resulted in contact with hostiles. 3 scouts had been injured badly enough to require extended medical leave. The statistical probability of that being coincidence sat somewhere below getting struck by lightning twice. Someone was using scout missions as assassination attempts. Someone with access to senior command. Someone who knew how to make murder look like operational risk. Ash saved her findings to encrypted storage, tagged them for Cole's eyes only, and tried not to think about how walking into his office for a 1400 debrief was going to feel with a mate bond humming between them and 12 years of invisibility, making her doubt she had the right to demand his attention. Her wolf had no such doubts. Her wolf knew exactly what it wanted, and patience wasn't part of the equation. The morning meetings were exactly as tedious as Cole expected. Council members positioning for advantage, supply officers requesting resources he didn't have, training cadre reporting readiness levels that meant nothing if the warriors didn't have the will to use them. He functioned on automatic, providing answers his conscious mind barely tracked. Years of command had taught him to compartmentalize, to lock away the personal and focus on the mission. His wolf snarled against the cage of his discipline, wanting to track Ash down, to verify she was safe, to claim what instinct insisted already belonged to him. Cole ignored it with practice born of desperation. Evelyn Torres found him between meetings, materializing in his path with the ease of someone who'd served as his second beta for 8 years. She was 50, gray-haired, competent in ways that made her invaluable. She'd helped him rebuild Blackwood after the Serena disaster, had stood with him when half the pack wanted his head, had earned trust Cole gave to almost no one. She also had her son's eyes, and Cole saw Daniel in her face every time they spoke. "We need to talk." Her voice carried weight that meant this wasn't optional. "About last night." Cole kept walking. Evelyn matched his pace, unbothered by his silence. She'd learned years ago that waiting him out was more effective than pushing. "The entire pack is talking. They're saying you claimed the Remington girl during combat, that you marked her without consent, without courtship, without any of the protocols we've established. Some are calling it romantic. Most are calling it reckless." Evelyn's tone stayed neutral, reporting facts without judgment, but Cole heard the question underneath. She was dying. His voice came out flat, empty of the emotion churning beneath the words. My wolf reacted. End of discussion. Except it's not. Evelyn stopped walking, forcing Cole to turn and face her. You're the alpha. Your choices affect the entire pack. If you've taken a mate, that has political implications, economic implications, social implications. The council needs to know if this is permanent or if you plan to dissolve the bond. The thought of severing the bond sent pain lancing through Cole's chest, sharp enough to make him catch his breath. His wolf howled protest at the very concept, but his mind, cold and calculating, knew Evelyn was right. Knew that claiming Ash had been weakness, had been the exact kind of vulnerability that got people killed. Schedule the debrief for 1400. We'll address it then. Cole. Evelyn's voice softened, just slightly, enough to remind him she was more than his second. She was also the closest thing he had to family. Be careful. I know you see her father in her. I know you feel responsible for what happened to him. But guilt is a poor foundation for a mate bond. The words hit harder than they should have. Cole had authorized the mission that killed James Remington, had sent him to hold a position that Command knew was likely suicide, had made the tactical call that saved 23 civilians at the cost of one Marine's life. It had been the right decision. It had also been the choice that made a 10-year-old girl an orphan. He'd watched Ash grow up in the shadows of Blackwood, half feral and wholly determined, and some part of him had always wondered if taking her in had been atonement or just another form of using people for pack benefit. This isn't about her father. The lie tasted bitter. This is about operational security. We'll debrief, assess the threat, and determine appropriate response. Evelyn studied him with eyes that had seen him at his worst and still chose to follow. Whatever you say, Alpha. But for what it's worth, she'd be good for you if you let her. Cole didn't respond. Didn't know how to explain that good for him was dangerous for her, that everyone he'd ever let close had ended up destroyed, that the best thing he could do for Ash Remington was keep her at arm's length and pray the bond faded with distance and time. He knew it wouldn't. Mate bonds didn't work that way. But hope was a stubborn thing, even when you knew better. The afternoon briefing room felt too small. Cole arrived precisely at 1400. Military punctuality bred too deep to abandon, even when every instinct screamed to avoid this conversation. Ash was already there, seated with straight spine and careful stillness, looking small in the chair and utterly unmovable in her composure. The bond flared the moment he entered, recognition singing between them like current through wire. His wolf surged forward, demanding acknowledgement, demanding he cross the space between them and verify she was whole and safe and his. Cole forced himself to the opposite side of the conference table, putting furniture between them like it could somehow insulate against the pull. Ash watched him with those hazel eyes that missed nothing, and Cole felt weighed and measured and found lacking. He'd prepared a speech, professional, clinical, appropriate distance. It died in his throat the moment he tried to speak, replaced by inadequate truth. How are you feeling? Fine. Her voice carried no inflection, giving him nothing. The wounds are healing. Good. Cole pulled out his tablet, calling up incident reports like they could save him. Walk me through yesterday. From the beginning. She did. Precise. Thorough. Every detail cataloged with Analyst efficiency. The mission authorization. The intelligence suggesting low probability contact. The decision to run solo because senior scouts deemed it insufficient threat for team deployment. The ambush that had been waiting with coordinated precision and equipment too good for random rogues. The attack wasn't opportunistic. Ash's fingers moved across her own tablet, pulling up files she'd prepared. They knew exactly where I'd be, knew the route I'd take, knew I'd be alone. Someone fed them intelligence. Cole's jaw tightened. Inside leak. That would be my assessment. Ash pulled up more data, pattern analysis that showed the kind of mind Cole had promoted her for. This wasn't the first time. 7 solo missions in 3 months, all authorized by the same senior command. 4 resulted in hostile contact. Statistical analysis suggests deliberate targeting. She walked him through the evidence with clinical detachment, building a case against Garrett Hayes brick by careful brick. By the time she finished, Cole's rage sat cold and heavy in his chest. Someone in his command structure had been using scout missions as assassination attempts. Someone he'd trusted with authority had turned that trust into weapon. The implications spread like poison. If Garrett was compromised, who else was? How deep did the rot go, and why target Ash specifically? Unless it wasn't about her at all. Unless someone wanted to destabilize his command, and killing his analysts was just the opening move. I need you to stay in secured areas until we resolve this. Cole's voice came out harder than he intended. No solo work, no missions outside the compound. You're a target now and I won't. He caught himself. Couldn't say won't lose you. Couldn't admit the bond had rewritten his priorities in ways that made him vulnerable. Couldn't show weakness when strength was all that kept his pack together. Won't risk an asset. His correction felt hollow even to his own ears. Ash's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Disappointment, maybe, or resignation. The bond carried emotions he didn't want to feel, her hurt bleeding through in ways that made his chest tight. Understood. She stood, gathering her materials with precise movements. Will that be all, Alpha? The formality cut deeper than it should have. They'd never been informal, never been anything but professional distance. But something about hearing it now, after everything, after his wolf had claimed her, and his mind had rejected that claim, made the space between them feel like violence. Ash. Her name felt foreign on his tongue, intimate in ways he hadn't earned. About last night. The bond. It wasn't. I didn't intend. You saved my life. Her voice stayed level, but the bond carried undercurrents he couldn't read. I'm grateful. Grateful. The word landed like accusation. Cole forced himself to say what needed saying, what duty demanded even if his wolf howled protest. Bonds can be severed, with time and distance and intent. If you want that, I won't contest it. The silence stretched too long. Ash studied him with an expression he couldn't parse, something between pity and anger and resignation. When she spoke, her voice carried weight he hadn't expected. Is that what you want? It's not about what I want. The truth escaped before he could cage it. It's about what's safe, what's smart, what keeps you alive. I see. She moved toward the door, and Cole's wolf screamed at him to stop her, to close the distance, to claim what was his by right and instinct, and the bond singing between them. Do you know what I find interesting, Alpha? He couldn't speak, could only watch her with every muscle locked against the urge to reach for her. You talk about safety, about being smart, about keeping me alive, but you won't look at me while you do it. You won't admit that the bond terrifies you. You'd rather cut me loose than risk feeling something that might compromise your precious control. Her hand touched the door handle. So here's my answer. I won't sever the bond, not because I want to force anything on you, but because my wolf chose you and she's not stupid. She saw something worth having, even if you can't. She left. Cole stood frozen in the empty briefing room, listening to her footsteps fade down the corridor, feeling the bond stretch between them like a physical ache. His wolf raged against his ribs, furious and desperate. His mind cataloged all the reasons distance was necessary, was smart, was the only way to keep her safe from the enemies that circled and the history that haunted him. But some treacherous part of him, the part that still remembered what it felt like to be human, whispered that maybe the real danger wasn't the bond. Maybe it was dying alone behind walls built from fear and calling that strength. Cole sat in the empty room long after Ash left, wrestling with truths he wasn't ready to face. Outside, the sun tracked westward toward evening. Inside, an Alpha learned that some battles couldn't be won with distance. The bond hummed between them, patient and inevitable, waiting for the day he'd be brave enough to stop running. That day wasn't today. But somewhere in the spaces between heartbeats, Cole Mackenzie wondered if maybe it could be tomorrow. The day bled toward evening. Ash buried herself in work because work was safe, was controllable, was something she understood. The intelligence center became sanctuary, monitors glowing in the dimness, data flowing in patterns that made sense when nothing else did. She'd meant what she said to Cole. Her wolf had chosen, and Ash trusted that instinct more than her own doubts. But understanding didn't make rejection hurt less, didn't make the bond easier to carry when it connected her to a man determined to maintain distance. Sarah had left hours ago, shooting worried glances but respecting Ash's need for space. The compound settled into evening routines around her. Patrols heading out, warriors returning, the eternal rhythm of pack life that continued regardless of personal drama. Ash was deep in communications logs when her system flagged an anomaly. Encrypted transmission, outbound from Blackwood servers, routed through proxies that suggested someone didn't want it traced. She shouldn't have caught it, would have missed it entirely if she hadn't been looking for patterns of deception. She traced the source. Senior command access, Garrett's credentials. The transmission had gone out 3 hours ago, while Garrett should have been in training exercises. She cracked the encryption with tools that technically she wasn't supposed to have. Privileges she'd quietly given herself months ago because being invisible meant people forgot to lock you out of systems. The message was brief, coded, but Ash had spent years learning to read between lines. Asset compromised, Alpha aware of targeting, advise suspension of operations and immediate extraction, awaiting confirmation. Asset compromised meant her. Alpha aware meant Cole knew about the assassination attempts. Awaiting confirmation meant Garrett was talking to someone outside Blackwood, someone with authority to give orders to a senior scout commander. Ash's hands shook as she pulled more data, found 6 months of communications, carefully hidden, between Garrett and an external contact. Found references to payment, to promises of position, to a larger plan she didn't have enough pieces to understand. Found something that made her blood freeze. References to Korsakov. That name carried weight in Blackwood like few others. Korsakov Pack, Russian mob masquerading as wolves. The organization that had planted Serena, that had orchestrated the attack that killed 43, that Cole had spent years hunting into near extinction. They were supposed to be broken, scattered, no longer a threat. Apparently they'd been rebuilding, and they'd found a new inside man. Ash encrypted her findings, tagged them for Cole's eyes only, and saved multiple redundant copies because paranoia had kept her alive this long. She was reaching for her communicator when footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. Heavy, purposeful, coming toward the intelligence center with the confidence of someone who belonged. She brought up the security feed. Garrett Hayes, walking toward her location, expressions set in lines that carried intent she didn't like. Ash's hand moved to the pistol she'd started carrying after yesterday. Regulations said non-combat personnel didn't need to be armed inside the compound. Experience said regulations were written by people who'd never been hunted. Garrett entered without knocking. His eyes swept the room, calculating, measuring. When he spoke, his voice carried casual friendliness that didn't match the tension in his shoulders. "Working late, Remington?" Following up on some anomalies in the mission logs. Ash kept her tone professional, kept her hand near her weapon, kept herself between Garrett and the only exit. Nothing urgent. "That's good. Very thorough. Very like you." He moved deeper into the room, positioning himself with tactical awareness that set alarm bells ringing. "The Alpha appreciates your dedication. I serve the pack." The platitude bought her time, let her edge toward the panic button installed beneath her desk. "We all do what's necessary." Necessary. Garrett's smile didn't reach his eyes. "That's an interesting word. I've been thinking a lot about necessity lately, about the costs of service, about what we sacrifice for the pack's benefit." He was too close now, invading her space with deliberate intent. Ash's wolf growled warning, pressing against her skin, reading threat in ways her human mind was still processing. "Do you know what's necessary right now, Remington?" Garrett's voice dropped, losing pretense. "What's necessary is for you to stop digging into things that don't concern you. Stop finding patterns that would be better left alone. Stop being so damn smart for your own good. Can't help my nature." Ash's hand closed on her weapon, drawing with smooth efficiency born of drill and desperation. "Back up, Hayes." He laughed, actually laughed, the sound carrying genuine amusement. "You going to shoot me? Inside the compound? You don't have the authority. Don't have the standing. You're just the analyst who got lucky enough to catch the Alpha's attention in a weak moment. I have the authority of someone defending herself from a traitor." Ash's voice stayed level despite the adrenaline singing through her veins. "I know about the communications. I know about Korsakov. I know you've been selling information and using scout missions to cover assassinations. The only question is whether you walk out of here in restraints or on a stretcher." Garrett's expression hardened. His hand moved toward his own weapon, telegraphing intent. "Then I guess we know the answer." He drew. Ash fired first. The shot took him in the shoulder, spinning him sideways, his weapon clattering across the floor. She fired again, center mass, training overriding hesitation. Garrett went down hard, blood spreading across his tactical vest, eyes wide with surprise that he'd underestimated her twice. Ash kept her weapon trained on him, fingers steady on the trigger, while her free hand slammed the panic button. Alarm shrieked through the compound, footsteps thundered in response. Garrett coughed blood, staring at her with something between respect and hatred. "You won't survive this." His voice came wet, damaged. "They'll come for you, for the Alpha, for everyone. Korsakov doesn't forget." "Then let them come." Ash's voice carried steel she didn't know she possessed. "We'll be ready." Cole burst through the door with weapon drawn and death in his eyes, taking in the scene with combat efficiency. Ash standing, Garrett bleeding, the geometry of violence that told its own story. His wolf roared, seeing mate endangered, seeing threat neutralized, seeing strength he hadn't given her credit for. His human mind cataloged details, assessed the situation, recognized that Ash had handled herself without his intervention. She met his gaze across the room, and for the first time since waking in his quarters, Cole saw her clearly. Not the invisible analyst, not the asset to protect, but a warrior in her own right, competent and capable and utterly unwilling to be diminished. The bond flared between them, recognition deeper than instinct, acknowledgement that maybe he'd been wrong about what she needed. "Medical's on the way." His voice came rough. "You hurt?" "No." Ash holstered her weapon with steady hands. "But you need to see what I found. Korsakov isn't finished with us." Cole moved to her terminal while his warriors secured Garrett, read her findings with growing fury, understood that yesterday's attack had been opening move in a larger strategy, that someone had been feeding intelligence to his greatest enemies for months, that the threat he'd thought eliminated had merely been waiting. How long until they move? His tactical mind was already shifting gears, moving from personal crisis to operational crisis. Based on the communications? They already are. Ash pulled up satellite imagery, supply chain tracking, movement patterns she'd pieced together from fragments. There's a force assembling at the northwest border, 80-plus hostiles, maybe more. They're coming for Blackwood, and they're coming soon. The room went quiet. Cole's warriors looked to him for orders, for leadership, for the cold certainty that had guided them through 8 years of his command. But Cole was looking at Ash, seeing the intelligence that had just bought them advance warning, seeing the courage that had taken down a traitor twice her size, seeing everything he'd been too blind or too afraid to acknowledge. "Get the council!" His voice carried command that moved wolves into action. "Emergency session in 30 minutes. We're going to war, and we're going to need allies." Ash saved her data, secured her systems, and turned to face him. The bond hummed between them, asking questions neither was ready to answer. But for the first time since the claiming, Cole didn't look away. Didn't hide behind duty or distance or the ghosts that haunted him. "Thank you." 2 words, inadequate, necessary, for warning us, for defending yourself, for being exactly what this pack needs, even when I was too damn stubborn to see it. Ash studied him, reading truth in the set of his shoulders and the openness in his expression. It was a start, not forgiveness, not acceptance, but acknowledgement, and that was something. "We'll talk." Cole's voice dropped, meant for her ears alone. "After. When we survive this, we'll figure out what this bond means and what we both want and how to make it work without it destroying us. Assuming we survive." Her pragmatism cut through the moment, grounding them both in reality. "Assuming that." Cole's lips quirked, almost smile, almost hope. "But I'm suddenly feeling motivated to make sure we do." The compound erupted into controlled chaos around them. Warriors mobilizing, council assembling, the machinery of survival grinding into motion. Cole moved to coordinate, fell into the familiar rhythms of command, but something had shifted in the space behind his ribs. Fear still lived there. Doubt and trauma, and the memory of 43 dead. But now, something else pressed alongside it. Something that felt like possibility, like maybe being strong enough to let someone in wasn't weakness after all. Ash watched him go, then turned back to her screens. Work to do, intelligence to gather, a war to prepare for. The bond could wait until survival was secured. Her wolf disagreed, wanted to follow, wanted to claim what was theirs. But Ash had learned patience through 12 years of invisibility. She could wait a little longer. Outside, the sun died in fire and gold. The mountains held their secrets. Blackwood pack braced for battle. And 2 wolves learned that sometimes the hardest thing to fight wasn't the enemy at your gates. Sometimes it was the fear inside your own walls, the terror that letting someone matter would break you beyond repair. Cole Mackenzie had spent a decade running from that fear. Ash Remington had spent 12 years being invisible to avoid it. But destiny didn't care about fear. The bond didn't care about history. And the war coming for them wouldn't wait for either to figure out what love meant, when you'd forgotten how to be vulnerable. The night gathered its strength. The enemy assembled its forces. And in the heart of Blackwood, an alpha and his mate stood apart, connected by bond and separated by doubt, preparing to face the darkness together, even while they struggled to face each other. Part 1 of their story ended with alarms and preparation and the cold certainty of violence coming. Part 2 would teach them that some battles required more than tactics. Some victories demanded the courage to be honest, to be open, to risk the one thing harder than dying. Risk loving, when loving meant giving someone the power to destroy you. The Korsakov were coming, but the real war had already begun. The war inside, where fear and hope wrestled for dominance, where two damaged people tried to figure out if broken pieces could somehow fit together into something stronger than the sum of their scars. Time would tell if they succeeded. Tonight, they had work to do, enemies to face, a pack to protect. Tomorrow, if they survived, they might have time for truth. The bond hummed between them, patient as stone, certain as sunrise, waiting for the day they'd stop fighting it and start fighting together. That day was coming. But first, they had to survive the night. The council chamber filled with tension thick enough to taste. 20 wolves crowded into a space meant for 12, senior warriors and pack administrators, and representatives from families who'd earned voice through blood and service. Emergency sessions always drew a crowd. War made everyone suddenly interested in leadership decisions they normally ignored. Cole stood at the head of the table, still wearing the tactical vest he'd thrown on when the alarm sounded. Blood spattered his sleeve, Garrett's blood, evidence of violence that made the threat real in ways words never could. Evelyn sat to his right, face carved from stone, processing the betrayal of a scout commander she'd recommended for promotion. The weight of that mistake showed in the lines around her eyes. Ash stood near the back, present because her intelligence had triggered this gathering, but separate because pack hierarchy didn't change overnight. Being the alpha's mate granted her protection, but not yet voice. That would take time she wasn't sure they had. Cole laid out the situation with military efficiency. Garrett's communications with Korsakov, the evidence of months of intelligence leaks, the force assembling at the northwest border, 80 wolves strong, armed and organized and coming for blood. He spoke without emotion, pure tactical assessment, but the bond carried undercurrents Ash felt in her chest. Rage, fear, determination wrapped around guilt that this was happening again. Questions came fast. How long until contact? What's their objective? Where are our vulnerabilities? Cole answered each with the certainty of someone who'd spent 20 years planning for scenarios exactly like this. But even as he spoke, Ash saw the calculation in the senior warrior's eyes, saw them measuring odds, counting casualties, wondering if Blackwood could survive alone. The answer sat heavy in the room. They couldn't. Not against Korsakov's numbers, not with their forces spread thin across territory too large for their population, not without allies they didn't have, and reinforcements that wouldn't come. Cole knew it, the council knew it, no one wanted to say it aloud. Thomas Reeves, eldest of the council members, finally broke the silence with the question that mattered. We need allies. Iron Ridge is closest, but they're also our competitors. Strand has no reason to help us, and every reason to let Korsakov bleed us weak. Then we convince him otherwise. Cole's voice carried weight that moved conversations. Because if Korsakov takes Blackwood, they won't stop there. They'll roll through Iron Ridge next. Strand's smart enough to see the threat. You're suggesting alliance with our rival? Another council member, younger, skeptical. The same pack that's been positioning to absorb our territory for years? They'll demand concessions we can't afford. They'll demand what we negotiate. Cole met the challenge head on, and we'll negotiate from a position where we're offering them survival instead of begging for mercy. We have intelligence Korsakov doesn't know we have. We have advance warning. We have time to prepare. That's leverage. The debate spiraled into the familiar territory of pack politics. Who trusted whom? What history taught about dealing with rivals? Whether pride was worth dying for? Ash listened with half her attention, the other half tracking calculations Cole couldn't voice in public. Numbers, casualties, the brutal mathematics of warfare that said even winning would cost more than Blackwood could afford to lose. Her tablet buzzed with incoming data. She glanced down, saw Sarah's analysis of Korsakov force composition, and felt her stomach drop. The numbers were worse than first estimates. Not 80 wolves, closer to 100, and they were equipped with military-grade hardware that suggested funding way beyond normal pack resources. She caught Cole's eye across the room. He read her expression, excused himself from the debate with curt efficiency, and met her at the display screen. She pulled up Sarah's findings without preamble. Revised intelligence, 100-plus hostiles, heavy weapons, body armor, communications gear that suggests professional military support. She kept her voice low, meant for his ears alone. This isn't just Korsakov remnants seeking revenge. Someone's backing them. Someone with serious resources. Cole studied the data with a stillness that meant his mind was racing. Russian mob has connections to international arms dealers. If they're calling in favors, leveraging old networks, they could field a force that makes our defensive capabilities look like toys. We need more than Iron Ridge. Ash pulled up regional maps, highlighting pack territories within range. Clearwater is small, but they're good fighters. Summit Ridge has stayed neutral, but they hate Korsakov for territorial disputes. If we can show this threatens everyone, not just us, we might assemble a coalition. That requires time we don't have, and trust that doesn't exist. Cole's jaw tightened, muscle jumping with tension he couldn't quite hide. But you're right, this is bigger than Blackwood versus Korsakov. This is about whether organized crime can use wolf packs as proxies for territorial expansion. If we let that precedent stand, every pack in the region becomes a target. Then we make that argument. To Strand. To the others. We frame this as collective defense, not asking for charity. She met his gaze, read the fear underneath the tactical assessment, felt it echo through the bond. We can do this. We have to. Cole's hand moved without conscious thought, reaching toward her, stopping just short of touch like he wasn't sure he had the right. The bond sang between them, recognition and need, and something that felt dangerously like hope. After this is over. His voice dropped, rough with promise and uncertainty. After we survive. We figure out what this means, what we are to each other, no more running, no more hiding behind protocol. Assuming we survive. Ash kept her tone light, but the bond carried the truth underneath. That she wanted that future, that she'd fight for it with everything she had, that the invisible analyst had found something worth being seen for. Their moment shattered as Evelyn called Cole back to the council debate. He went, shoulders set with burden she wished she could share. Ash turned back to her data, building the intelligence package that might convince their rivals to become their allies. The night ground forward. Decisions emerged through painful consensus. Contact Iron Ridge. Request immediate meeting. Prepare defensive positions. Evacuate non-combatants to the deep shelters. Mobilize every able wolf for the fight ahead. By the time council adjourned, dawn threatened the eastern horizon. Cole looked like he'd aged a decade in 6 hours. Ash felt the exhaustion through the bond, the weight of command pressing down on him with crushing force. She found him on the ramparts after, watching the sunrise paint the mountains in shades of blood and gold. He didn't turn when she approached, but his shoulders relaxed fractionally. Recognition through the bond that said her presence eased something inside him. "Did you sleep at all?" She kept her distance, respecting the space he seemed to need even as her wolf pushed her to close it. "Haven't slept properly in a decade." Cole's voice carried grim humor. "Why start now?" "Because exhausted leaders make mistakes. And we can't afford mistakes. Can't afford rest either." He finally looked at her, and the vulnerability in his expression stole her breath. "Every minute I'm not preparing is a minute Korsakov gains advantage. Every second I waste on sleep is time I could use to find the angle that keeps my people alive. Your people include you. Someone needs to remind you that you're allowed to be human. Being human is a luxury alphas can't afford." The bitterness in his tone spoke to wounds deeper than Korsakov. "I learned that the night Serena's betrayal killed 43. I was human then. I loved her, trusted her, let myself be weak and vulnerable and open, and that weakness bought body bags and funeral pyres and parents burying children. That wasn't weakness. That was betrayal. There's a difference." Ash moved closer, drawn by something stronger than wisdom. You can't spend your life punishing yourself for trusting the wrong person. That's not honor. That's just slow suicide. Maybe. Cole's gaze returned to the horizon, to the mountains where enemies assembled. But it's kept everyone else alive. Can't argue with results. The transport arrived at noon, rolling up to Blackwood's gates, with an escort that suggested Iron Ridge took security seriously. 3 vehicles, armor-plated, windows tinted, professional operation that spoke to resources Blackwood envied. Jacob Strand emerged from the center vehicle with the easy confidence of someone who'd never had to prove himself through violence alone. 40 years old and carrying them well, silver threading dark hair, scars visible on forearms left bare despite the mountain cold. He moved like a fighter, balanced and aware, but his eyes held warmth that Cole's had lost somewhere in the fire. Cole met him at the gate with honor guard and formal protocol. They'd fought before, traded territory and pride and blood in the endless dance of pack politics. But they'd never been enemies, rivals, yes, competitors for resources and influence. But there'd always been respect underneath, the acknowledgement of one warrior to another. Strand. Cole's greeting carried no hostility, just weary pragmatism. Thank you for coming. Mackenzie. Strand's voice held traces of aristocratic East Coast education wrapped around Ranger roughness. Your message suggested urgency. I'm curious what could make the Iceman ask for help. They moved to the war room, both alphas flanked by senior staff. Ash trailed with the intelligence officers, present but peripheral, watching the interplay between 2 men who might decide her pack's survival with nothing more than ego and history. Cole laid out the situation with the same efficiency he'd used for counsel. Garrett's betrayal, Korsakov's return, the force assembling to destroy Blackwood as revenge for Serena's death and statement of intent to anyone who opposed Russian mob expansion. He presented evidence methodically, building a case that this threatened more than one pack. Strand listened without interruption, fingers steepled, expression giving nothing away. When Cole finished, silence stretched uncomfortable before the Iron Ridge Alpha spoke. Revenge and territorial expansion. Old story. The question is why I should care. Your pack, your problem. We have our own borders to defend. Because you're next. Cole pulled up intelligence Ash had compiled. Korsakov communications reference Iron Ridge as secondary target. They take us down, they move on you. Only difference is they'll be battle-tested and we'll be dead. You'll face them alone instead of alongside allies. Strand studied the data, and something shifted in his expression. Not fear, calculation. The same tactical assessment Cole had run a dozen times. Iron Ridge could probably survive Korsakov assault if they prepared properly, but the casualties would be devastating, the cost too high, the precedent too dangerous. What are you proposing? Alliance? Strand's tone stayed neutral, but his body language suggested openness. Temporary coalition, shared command for the duration of the threat, combined forces, coordinated defense, unified strategic planning. After Korsakov is eliminated, we renegotiate our territorial agreements from a position where we both survive to argue about them. And if I refuse, if I decide letting Korsakov weaken you serves Iron Ridge's long-term interests? The temperature in the room dropped. Cole's senior warriors shifted, hands moving toward weapons. Strand's escort mirrored the movement, the space between cooperation and violence measured in heartbeats and pride. Then you make the same mistake Korsakov made. Cole's voice stayed level, but death lived in his eyes. You underestimate what desperate wolves will do. We'll fight them on our own. Some of us will die, maybe most. But we'll take enough of them with us that when they come for you, you won't have the numbers to stop them. And when Iron Ridge falls because you chose pride over pragmatism, I'll be waiting in whatever hell dead alphas go to, ready to remind you that I offered you another option. Strand held his gaze, measuring, testing. Then something unexpected happened. He smiled. There he is, the Cole Mackenzie I heard about. Not the Iceman everyone whispers about. The Marine who ran 60 clicks through hostile territory to extract a wounded team, who held a position against 100 hostiles with nothing but rifle and balls, who earned a Silver Star by being too stubborn to die when any sane man would have quit. That man I'll fight beside. The cold bastard who won't admit he feels anything? Him I'm not sure about. Cole's expression fractured. surprise bleeding through his careful control. Ash felt it through the bond, the shock of being seen, being understood by someone who should have been opponent but was offering to be something else. "You've done research." Cole's voice came rough. "I know who I'm dealing with." Strand leaned forward, elbows on the table, dropping pretense. "Here's the truth, Mackenzie. I don't like you. You're cold, you're paranoid, and you lead through fear more than love. But you're also loyal to the point of stupidity. You've never asked your wolves to face anything you wouldn't face first. And when the shooting starts, I want you on my flank because you're the most stubbornly unkillable son of a bitch I've ever met." "That's supposed to be a compliment?" "It's an acknowledgement." Strand's expression sobered. "I lost my mate 6 years ago. Rogue attack. I was deployed, couldn't get back in time. She died alone, terrified, calling for me." He paused, and the room felt the weight of that confession. "I know what it costs to lose someone you love. I know what it does to you, and I recognize the symptoms when I see them." His gaze shifted, finding Ash in the back of the room. "Which brings me to my next point. You have an analyst. I'd like to borrow her." The possessive snarl that rumbled through Cole's chest made several wolves flinch. Strand's smile returned, knowing and deliberate. "Easy, Alpha. Not like that." His tone gentled. "I saw her intelligence package, the pattern analysis, the force composition estimates, the predictive modeling. That's high-level work, professional grade. And I'm smart enough to know that when someone hands me a tactical advantage, I don't ignore it because of ego. I'm asking to consult with her, pick her brain, get her read on Korsakov's strategy." Ash stepped forward before Cole could respond, before his protective instincts could turn cooperation into conflict. "With respect, Alpha Strand, you can ask me directly. I'm standing right here." Strand's attention fixed on her with intensity that suggested he was reassessing previous assumptions. "Fair point. Analyst Remington, correct? Daughter of Captain James Remington, Marine Corps, posthumous Silver Star for action above and beyond?" "Yes." Ash kept her voice steady despite the way her heart kicked. "You knew my father?" "Served with him. Different units, same deployment. He was a good man, better Marine, the kind of leader who made everyone around him want to be braver than they were." Strand's expression carried genuine respect. "You have his eyes, and from what I've seen, his tactical mind. So I'll ask you directly. Will you consult with Iron Ridge Strategic Planning? Share your analysis of Korsakov capabilities and help us build a defense that keeps everyone alive?" The room waited, Cole's jaw tight enough to crack teeth, Wolf barely restrained, instinct warring with pragmatism. Ash met Strand's gaze and made a choice that terrified and empowered her in equal measure. "On one condition, I consult with both alphas. Shared intelligence, shared planning, complete transparency. No games, no positioning, no using me as leverage in whatever rivalry you two have going. We work together, or I keep my analysis to myself." Strand laughed, genuine amusement lighting his face. "She's got spine. I like that." He looked at Cole with challenge and respect mixed. "You've got yourself a keeper, Mackenzie, assuming you're smart enough not to screw it up." Cole's control cracked just slightly, enough for Ash to feel the storm raging underneath. But when he spoke, his voice carried hard-won acceptance. "Agreed. Shared intelligence. Complete transparency." He fixed Strand with a look that promised violence if boundaries were crossed. "But she's not leverage. She's not a tool. She's a person with expertise we need. Treat her with respect, or alliance be damned. Wouldn't dream of anything else." Strand extended his hand across the table. "We have a deal?" Cole clasped his forearm in the warrior grip that sealed agreements older than words. "We have a deal." The planning session stretched into evening, 2 alphas and their senior staff building strategy from intelligence and experience and the brutal honesty of men who knew warfare intimately. Ash found herself at the center, pulling up data, running scenarios, answering questions from both sides with efficiency that earned grudging respect from wolves who'd dismissed her yesterday. Strand treated her like a professional, asking for analysis without condescension, pushing back on assumptions without dismissing her expertise. It was novel enough to be almost uncomfortable, being seen, being heard, being valued for her mind instead of her bloodline or her bond to Cole. She watched Cole watch her interact with Strand, felt the jealousy burning through their connection like acid, but underneath it, something else. Pride, maybe. recognition that she was holding her own against an alpha known for intellectual ruthlessness, acknowledgement that she wasn't fragile or helpless or in need of protection from conversations. Over the next 3 days, they worked through defensive positions, kill zones, fallback points. Strand's tactical background meshed well with Cole's combat experience, two professionals finding common ground in the language of warfare. The plan emerged piece by piece, leveraging terrain advantages, creating choke points, forcing Korsakov to fight where Blackwood and Iron Ridge held every edge. 72 hours wasn't enough time to perfect coordination between packs, but it was enough to establish communication protocols, fire discipline, and basic combined tactics. Warriors from both sides trained together, learning to trust wolves who'd been strangers at the beginning of the week. It was brilliant. It was desperate. It gave them maybe 40% odds of survival. Those were better odds than Cole had expected. By the time they broke for food and rest, exhaustion dragged at everyone. Strand accepted quarters in the guest wing, his security detail positioning themselves with practiced efficiency. The Iron Ridge Alpha paused at the door, looking back at Cole with something between sympathy and challenge. "For what it's worth, Mackenzie, that analyst of yours, she's special. Not just smart, not just capable. There's steel in her, wisdom beyond her years, the kind of partner who makes a good leader great." He smiled, edges soft with understanding. "Don't waste it. Don't let fear keep you from what could be the best thing that ever happened to you. I did that once. Lost my mate because I chose duty over her safety. Sent her on a mission I should have led myself. 6 years later, I still wake up wishing I'd made a different choice." With that, he left. Cole stood in the empty corridor, words echoing in the space behind his ribs. The bond pulled him toward Ash, toward the intelligence center where she was still working despite the hour, toward conversation he'd been avoiding because it required vulnerability he'd trained himself not to show. He found her surrounded by screens and coffee cups, eyes red from screen glare and exhaustion, but still focused. She didn't look up when he entered, too deep in whatever analysis held her attention. "You should sleep." His voice came out softer than intended. "Should do a lot of things." Her fingers kept moving across the keyboard. "Sleep's pretty far down the priority list when we're trying to not die. Won't help anyone if you collapse from exhaustion. Funny, I seem to remember telling you the same thing this morning." She finally looked at him, challenge and affection mixed in her expression. "Guess stubborn is catching." Cole moved closer, drawn by the bond and something deeper than instinct. He'd spent the last 3 days watching her shine, watching her command respect from wolves who'd ignored her for years, watching her be exactly what she'd always been, but finally given space to show it. And somewhere between the planning sessions and the tactical debates, something had shifted in his chest. Fear was still there, would probably always be there, but now something else lived alongside it, something that felt dangerously like admiration. "You impressed Strand. That's not easy. He built his reputation on being the smartest wolf in any room. For him to defer to your analysis means he sees what I've been too blind to acknowledge." "Which is?" Ash saved her work, turned to face him fully, walls down enough for him to see the hope underneath. "That you're not just my mate. You're my equal. In ways that matter more than physical strength or combat prowess. You see patterns I miss. You think 3 moves ahead when I'm stuck on the immediate threat. You make me better by challenging me to be more than the Iceman." Cole forced himself to continue, to push past the discomfort of honesty. "I've been treating you like something fragile that needs protecting. But you don't need protection. You need partnership. And I've been too scared to offer that because partnership requires trust. I didn't think I had left. And now?" Her voice stayed quiet, giving him space to find words. "Now I'm still scared, still certain this will end badly because that's the only way I know how to think. But I'm also seeing that maybe being alone isn't the strength I convinced myself it was. Maybe it's just cowardice with better marketing." He reached for her hand, giving her chance to pull away, relieved when she didn't. "I can't promise I won't be difficult. Can't promise I'll be good at this. 20 years of military training and a decade of trauma don't exactly prepare you for healthy emotional intimacy. Good thing I'm patient." Ash's fingers intertwined with his, and the bond sang between them. "And for what it's worth, I'm terrified too. Being seen is uncomfortable when you've spent your whole life invisible. Having someone care whether you survive is dangerous when you've learned to treat yourself as expendable. We're both disasters, Mackenzie. Maybe we can be disasters together. Cole pulled her close with careful certainty, arms wrapping around her like he could shield her from the world through proximity alone. She fit against his chest with rightness that made his wolf purr satisfaction. This was claim. This was acceptance. This was vulnerability he'd sworn never to risk again. It was also possibly the smartest tactical decision he'd ever made. They stood there in the quiet of the intelligence center, surrounded by screens showing the force that wanted them dead, holding each other like they could prevent the darkness through nothing but stubborn refusal to let go. The bond settled between them, no longer fighting itself, no longer pulling in opposite directions. Agreement. Partnership. The beginning of something that might actually survive, if they lived through the next week. The days that followed blurred together in endless preparation. Iron Ridge warriors arrived in waves, professional and disciplined, integrating with Blackwood forces through joint training that smoothed the rough edges of rivalry. Strand moved between the packs with easy authority, earning trust through competence and the kind of warm leadership Cole had never managed. Ash watched the difference, saw how Strand's wolves smiled when he approached, while Cole's maintained careful distance. Both styles worked. Both kept their packs alive. But there was something in the Iron Ridge Alpha's approach that spoke to connection Cole had deliberately severed. She found Strand on the second evening, reviewing defensive positions from the northern rampart. He nodded greeting as she approached, making space at the wall without making it awkward. "Your tactical suggestions have been invaluable." His voice carried genuine appreciation. The funnel points, the concealed positions, the layered fallback lines. Military Academy couldn't have designed better. My father taught me. Before he deployed. Before. She stopped, old grief sitting familiar in her chest. He used to set up models with toy soldiers, walk me through scenarios, said a good mind could win battles that strength alone couldn't. He was right. Strand turned to face her, expression serious. "I meant what I said before, about him being a good man. He died holding a position that saved 23 civilians. That kind of sacrifice doesn't get forgotten by the men who served alongside him. Thank you." The words felt inadequate, but they were all she had, for remembering, for telling me. They stood in companionable silence, watching the sun paint the mountains in fire. Finally, Strand spoke again, voice carrying weight that suggested he'd been considering these words carefully. "Can I ask you something personal?" "Depends on the question." Ash kept her tone light, but wariness crept in. "Why Mackenzie?" Strand's gaze stayed on the horizon, giving her space to deflect if she wanted. "I'm not questioning the bond. Fate doesn't ask permission. But I'm curious what you see in him. Beyond the obvious alpha appeal, beyond the mate instinct. What makes you fight for someone who's spent weeks pushing you away?" Ash considered deflection, then decided honesty served them both better. "Because underneath the ice, there's fire. Because he cares so much it terrifies him, so he pretends not to feel anything. Because he carries the weight of 43 deaths like personal failure when the only failure was trusting someone who didn't deserve it." She met Strand's gaze directly. "And because I understand what it's like to be invisible, to be dismissed, to have to prove your worth every single day while watching others get credit for breathing. He sees me now. Maybe it took trauma to get there, but he sees me. And I'm willing to fight for that. Even if he breaks your heart? Even then, because some things are worth the risk." Her conviction surprised herself. "And because I think maybe I can help him remember he's allowed to be human. That strength doesn't require sacrificing everything soft. That leadership can include compassion without becoming weakness." Strand studied her with new appreciation. "You're braver than I was. When my mate was alive, I kept her separate from the dangerous parts of leadership. Thought I was protecting her. Really, I was just protecting myself from having to show vulnerability. She died not knowing how much I loved her because I was too proud to say it where my wolves could hear." He smiled, edges bitter. "Don't let him make that mistake. Don't let him waste time you might not have." "I won't." The promise felt like vow. "And for what it's worth, she wasn't wrong about you. Whatever you kept hidden, she knew. Wolves always know." Strand's expression cracked, grief and gratitude mixing in ways that made him suddenly human instead of alpha. Then his professional mask returned, smooth and practiced. "We should get back. Korsakov won't wait for us to finish our emotional processing." They walked toward the command center together, unlikely allies bound by respect and shared purpose. Behind them, the sun died in glory. Ahead, the night gathered its strength for the battles to come. 3 days before the projected assault, new intelligence arrived that changed everything. Sarah burst into the war room during a planning session, face flushed with excitement and terror mixed. "We've got movement, northern approach. Not Korsakov, different signature." She pulled up satellite imagery on the main display. Clearwater Pack, Summit Ridge, maybe 30 additional wolves heading our way. Strand and Cole exchanged looks, calculating what that meant. Reinforcements or opportunists come to pick the bones? The answer came an hour later when 2 more alphas arrived under flag of truce. Marcus Chen from Clearwater, young and intense. Sarah Moonwater from Summit Ridge, older and wary, both with the same message. Korsakov threatened them too. Not directly, not yet, but the implications were clear. If organized crime could use wolf packs as military proxies, no one was safe. Better to fight together now than face the enemy separately later. The coalition expanded, the odds improved, not good but better than suicide. 4 packs, 190 wolves, united against common threat. It was unprecedented. It was desperate. It was possibly the only chance any of them had. The final planning session ran through the night. 4 alphas hammering out strategy, egos and pragmatism balanced on knife's edge. Ash coordinated intelligence from all sources, building a picture of Korsakov capabilities that was both more and less frightening than initial estimates. They were professional, well-equipped, organized, but they were also overconfident, certain that wolf packs would fracture under pressure, that old rivalries would matter more than survival. The coalition was the edge Korsakov hadn't planned for, the variable that might turn certain defeat into possible victory. Dawn came too fast. The council dispersed to final preparations. Ash found herself alone in the war room, staring at maps that would be tested in violence within hours. Her hands shook slightly, adrenaline and fear mixing in ways she couldn't quite control. Cole found her there, moving with the silence of a predator. He didn't speak immediately, just stood beside her, presence solid and grounding. The bond thrummed between them, carrying emotions too complex for words. Finally, he broke the silence. "When this is over, when we survive." His hand found hers, fingers intertwining with certainty that belied the doubt in his voice. "I want to do this right. Mate ceremony, public acknowledgement. Everything I should have done from the beginning instead of running scared. That a promise or a proposal?" She kept her tone light, but her heart hammered against her ribs. Both. Neither. A desperate man trying to say he's sorry for being an idiot. Cole turned to face her fully, and for the first time since she'd known him, his walls were completely down. "I love you. I'm terrified of that. I'll probably continue being difficult about it. But I love you, and I need you to know that before we walk into hell." The words landed like physical force, stealing her breath and filling the empty places she'd learned to ignore. 3 words. Simple. Inadequate. Everything. "I love you too." Her voice cracked slightly. "Even when you're being an idiot. Maybe especially then." He kissed her with desperate intensity, claiming and claiming and claiming again. The bond flared between them, recognition and acceptance and promise all mixed together. This was mate. This was partnership. This was 2 broken people deciding that maybe together they could be something stronger than their individual scars. The kiss broke eventually, both of them breathing hard, foreheads pressed together in the quiet of the war room. Outside, the pack prepared for battle. Inside, 2 wolves made peace with the fact that love was terrifying and necessary and worth fighting for. Even if the fight might kill them, especially then. The sun climbed higher. The enemy assembled at the border. The coalition stood ready. And in the heart of Blackwood, an alpha and his mate faced the coming darkness together. Whatever happened next, they would face it as partners. Not perfect, not healed, but together. And sometimes together was enough. The bond sang between them, no longer question but answer, no longer doubt but certainty. They had found each other in the wreckage of their pasts, had claimed each other despite fear and trauma and every reason to keep running. Now they would fight for the future that claiming had promised. Win or lose, live or die, together. The war was coming, but they were ready as broken people could be when facing the darkness, armed with nothing but stubborn hope and the certainty that some things were worth any cost. Love was one of those things. Pack was another. Honor demanded the rest. Cole Mackenzie had learned to be cold to survive. Ash Remington had learned to be invisible for the same reason. Together, they were learning that maybe survival wasn't enough. Maybe living required the courage to be seen, to be vulnerable, to risk everything on the possibility that connection was stronger than isolation. The enemy would test that theory soon enough. Time would tell if they were right. But standing in the war room with dawn breaking outside and battle waiting ahead, neither Cole nor Ash doubted their choice. They had each other. They had purpose. They had a pack worth dying for and a love worth living for. Whatever came next, they would face it together. And that, finally, was enough. The attack came at dawn, exactly as Ash's analysis predicted. Korsakov had learned nothing from their previous failures, still believed wolf packs would fracture under pressure, still underestimated the desperate mathematics of survival. They rolled toward Blackwood territory with the confidence of professionals who'd never faced unified opposition. That arrogance would cost them everything. Cole stood on the command ridge, watching the convoy approach through dawn mist. 15 vehicles, heavy transport, moving with tactical precision through the mountain pass that funneled them exactly where the coalition needed them. Behind him, 190 wolves waited in positions Ash had mapped with ruthless efficiency. Blackwood, Iron Ridge, Clearwater, Summit Ridge. 4 packs that had spent decades competing, now united by threat greater than pride. The bond hummed steady in Cole's chest, connecting him to Ash 300 yards behind the front line. She was in the command bunker with Sarah and the communications team, coordinating intelligence flow between alphas. Safe as he could make her. Still close enough that his wolf couldn't settle, instinct demanding he verify her safety every 30 seconds. Strand materialized beside him, moving with ranger silence. The Iron Ridge Alpha studied the approaching force with professional detachment. Right on schedule. Your mate's analysis was flawless. She usually is. Cole kept binoculars trained on the convoy, counting vehicles, estimating forces. 100+ hostiles, maybe more. They're packed tight, overconfident. Good. Makes them predictable. Strand checked his weapon with practiced efficiency. Chen's forces are in position on the south ridge. Moonwater has the north. When they hit the kill zone, we collapse on them from 3 sides. Standard hammer and anvil, but with better terrain. Assuming they take the bait. Assuming they don't smell the trap. They won't. Strand's voice carried certainty. Because they think we're scared. Think we'll be running, not preparing. They're coming for revenge and spectacle, not tactical engagement. That emotional investment makes them blind. Hope you're right. Cole lowered the binoculars, met Strand's gaze. Because if this goes wrong, we don't get a second chance. Then we make sure it doesn't go wrong. Strand extended his hand. Warrior grip forearm to forearm. Whatever happens today, Mackenzie, it's been an honor preparing beside you. You're every bit the stubborn bastard I hoped you'd be. Cole clasped his arm, felt something shift in his chest. Respect, kinship, the acknowledgement between men who'd seen combat and understood what it cost. Right back at you, Strand. Try not to die. Would hate to have to explain to your pack how their alpha got himself killed being heroic. Same to you. And Mackenzie? Strand's expression sobered. That woman of yours, she's watching this through comms. Make sure you give her a reason to keep believing you're worth the trouble. Planning on it. The convoy entered the pass. Cole signaled his forces, watching them flow into position with discipline born of endless drilling. 3 days hadn't been enough time to perfect coordination between packs, but it had been enough to establish basics. Communication protocols, fire discipline, the understanding that survival required trusting wolves who'd been strangers days ago. The lead vehicle crossed the trigger point. Cole raised his hand, held it steady while every muscle screamed to act. Patience was a weapon. Timing mattered more than courage. The convoy pushed deeper into the kill zone, vehicle after vehicle entering the funnel. Now! The word came through comms, Ash's voice steady despite the fear Cole felt through their bond. All vehicles in position. Rear guard just entered the pass. You have them contained. Cole dropped his hand. Explosives detonated in sequence. Thunder rolling through the canyon as charges Ash's demolition team had placed collapsed the pass entrance and exit simultaneously. Rock and fire and chaos trapped the convoy between walls of stone and wolf forces, hidden in positions commanding every angle. Korsakov had walked into the trap exactly as predicted. Now came the hard part, making sure the trap held. The first wave hit before the dust settled. Blackwood and Iron Ridge forces descending from high ground, wolves in combat form tearing into disoriented hostiles. Chen's Clearwater pack struck from the south, fast and vicious, cutting supply lines. Moonwater's Summit Ridge warriors held the north, disciplined and patient, preventing escape. Cole led his strike team straight into the center, targeting the command vehicle. Korsakov's tactical leader would be there, coordinating response, trying to organize defense against the ambush. Eliminate command, and the professional military operation would degrade into survival instinct. Make them fight as individuals instead of unit, and numbers meant less than terrain and desperation. The battle became chaos dressed in violence, gunfire and snarls and screams mixing into soundtrack of warfare that Cole knew intimately. He'd fought in Iraq, Afghanistan, a dozen places that didn't officially exist, had learned to function while brothers died beside him, had mastered the cold efficiency required to kill and keep killing until the mission was complete. But this was different. This wasn't distant threat or abstract enemy. This was home. This was pack. This was fighting for the woman connected to his heart through bond that made her pain his pain, her survival necessary for his own. Made him more dangerous than he'd been in 20 years of service. Made him absolutely merciless. He hit the command vehicle in wolf form, mass and momentum shattering armored glass. Found the interior packed with hostiles, professional soldiers who'd served in actual wars before becoming supernatural mercenaries. They were good, trained, experienced. Cole was better, and he was fighting for something they couldn't understand. The close-quarters combat lasted 30 seconds that felt like 30 hours. When he emerged, 3 hostiles were dead, and the command vehicle was neutralized. Cole shifted back to human form, grabbed the tactical radio, started issuing orders in Russian he'd learned during deployments. Fall back, all units retreat, command is compromised, abort mission, save yourselves. It was psychological warfare, simple and brutal. Korsakov forces heard their commander's radio giving retreat orders, saw their tactical center destroyed, felt the coordinated assault from 4 directions. Training said fight through the chaos. Instinct said survive. When training conflicted with instinct, instinct usually won. The professional military operation started fragmenting. Some hostiles held position, disciplined and committed. Others broke, seeking escape routes that didn't exist. The ones who held became priority targets. The ones who ran found Moonwater's forces waiting with the patience of predators who understood that sometimes the best hunting happened when prey came to you. Cole coordinated with other alphas through comms, Ash's voice in his ear providing real-time intelligence. Enemy force composition, casualties on both sides, shifting tactics as Korsakov adapted. She was battlefield controller, seeing the larger picture while he focused on immediate threats. Partnership, trust. The thing he'd been too scared to embrace, now keeping him alive. The battleground through brutal minutes. Coalition forces had advantage of terrain, preparation, surprise. But Korsakov had numbers and equipment and experience. Casualties mounted on both sides. Wolves Cole knew, wolves Strand commanded, wolves from packs he'd barely met, all bleeding and dying for territory and principle, and the desperate hope that unified resistance meant something. He found Strand in the center of fighting, holding a choke point against 6 hostiles. The Iron Ridge Alpha moved with efficiency that spoke to ranger training, using terrain and positioning to offset numerical disadvantage. But even skill had limits. He was taking hits, slowing fractionally, wolf form showing damage no amount of toughness could ignore. Cole hit the hostiles from behind without warning. 2 down before they knew he'd arrived. The survivors split attention, fatal mistake against 2 alphas working in concert. Strand took advantage, wolf jaws closing on throat, while Cole eliminated the last threat. They stood back to back in brief lull, both breathing hard, both bleeding from wounds that would heal if they survived long enough. Getting too old for this shit. Strand's voice came ragged through his wolf form, humor fighting exhaustion. You're 40. That's basically ancient. Cole scanned for next threat, found the battlefield shifting. Korsakov forces consolidating around a defensive position near the largest transport vehicle, making a stand. Smart play, wrong battlefield. We need to finish this. They're dug in around the heavy transport. I see it. Strand shifted to human form, tactical mind overriding wolf instinct. They're protecting something, personnel or equipment. Either way, that's their leadership. We break that position, this is over. Agreed. Cole signaled his forces, watched Strand do the same. Final push, overwhelming force. End this before more wolves die for pride and revenge. The coalition converged on the defensive position in coordinated assault that would have made any military tactician proud. 4 packs, moving as one, communication flowing through Ash's coordination. This was what Korsakov hadn't planned for, what their arrogance couldn't imagine. Wolves who hated each other choosing survival over ego. The defensive position held for 90 seconds. Then it shattered under weight of assault from every direction. Hostiles broke, fled, died. The transport vehicle doors opened and a figure emerged that made Cole's wolf snarl recognition. Nikolai Volkov, Serena's brother, commander of Korsakov forces, the man who'd orchestrated this entire revenge operation. He was massive, silver-black wolf with eyes that held intelligence and cruelty in equal measure. Older than Cole by decade, experienced in ways that came from surviving conflicts across continents. He shifted to human form, standing calm despite the carnage around him. Mackenzie. His accent carried Moscow streets and prison yards. Finally. Been waiting 10 years for this conversation. Volkov. Cole approached with weapons ready, but not immediately threatening. This ends now. Surrender your forces. Face council justice. Live. Nikolai laughed, sound carrying genuine amusement. Justice? You murdered my sister, burned her alive after she gave you everything, and you speak of justice? Your sister was a spy. A weapon pointed at my pack. She killed 43 wolves, including juveniles, including families. Cole's voice stayed level through rage that wanted to consume him. I executed a war criminal. There's a difference. She died for her pack, for Korsakov. That is honor. Nikolai's expression hardened. You wouldn't understand. You with your American ideals, your naive belief that rules matter. In my world, family matters, blood matters, and blood demands blood. He moved. Faster than Cole anticipated, experience overcoming youth, catching him half-shifted and vulnerable. They collided in violence that was personal and primal. This wasn't tactical. This was rage meeting rage, grief fighting guilt. The past demanding resolution through present violence. They fought through the wreckage of the battlefield, wolf and man and something between. Nikolai was skilled, vicious, using techniques from Spetsnaz and street fighting mixed with wolf savagery. Cole matched him through Marine training and desperate determination, and the bond singing in his chest that reminded him he had reason to survive. But Nikolai was winning. Age bringing experience Cole hadn't earned yet. Damage from earlier fighting slowing Cole's reactions. The gap between competent and exceptional measured in heartbeats and blood. Nikolai pinned him, claws at throat, death in his eyes. Your mate, the lunar bitch, she dies next. After I finish you, I find her. Make her suffer for her bloodline, for existing, for giving you something I can take away. The words cut through Cole's mind like blade through fog. Lunar. The term meant nothing and everything, but the threat against Ash crystallized his focus. His wolf surged with protective fury that overrode pain and exhaustion. He bucked, twisted, used Nikolai's overconfidence against him. Marine Corps hadn't taught him to be strongest, had taught him to win regardless. Dirty fighting, using environment, leverage over strength. He got space, got position, got claws into vulnerable spots that even experienced fighters couldn't fully protect. The fight turned. Cole forced Nikolai back, pressing advantage with relentless aggression. This was for 43 dead, for Ash's safety, for the future he'd been too scared to claim, but now refused to surrender. Nikolai realized too late he'd made fatal mistake. Had assumed Cole fought for pride, hadn't understood he fought for love, and love made desperate men more dangerous than rage ever could. Cole's jaws closed on Nikolai's throat, crushing windpipe, ending the threat. The Korsakov commander died with surprise in his eyes, never understanding what had killed him. Not strength, not skill, partnership. The thing Cole had rejected for decade, now the weapon that ensured survival. The battlefield quieted. Coalition forces finishing remaining hostiles, securing prisoners, beginning terrible work of counting casualties. Cole shifted to human form, stood over Nikolai's body, felt nothing but exhaustion and hollow victory. Strand appeared beside him, bloody but alive. It's done. Korsakov forces are broken. Survivors are surrendering. He studied Cole with expression mixing respect and concern. You good? Define good. Cole's voice came flat, emotionless, walls rebuilding automatically. Still breathing. Still functional. Close enough. Strand gripped his shoulder, warrior acknowledgement. Your mate's been calling for you. Might want to let her know you survived before her heart stops from stress. The bond. Cole had been suppressing it during combat, couldn't afford distraction. Now he opened awareness and felt Ash's terror bleeding through. She'd felt his pain, his fear, his brush with death. Had stayed professional through it all, kept doing her job, but the cost showed in the emotional aftermath. He moved toward the command bunker, ignoring protests from his body. Found Ash standing outside, having abandoned her post the moment fighting stopped. She looked small and fierce and utterly furious. You reckless, stupid, self-sacrificing bastard! Her voice shook, anger and relief and fear all mixed together. I felt you almost die, felt Nikolai about to kill you, and you blocked the bond, shut me out. Had to focus, couldn't afford distraction. I'm not a distraction. I'm your mate, your partner. She closed the distance, hands fisting in his tactical vest. When you hurt, I hurt. When you're in danger, I feel it. You don't get to protect me from that. Not anymore. Cole pulled her close, ignoring the blood and pain and audience of warriors who'd never seen their alpha show vulnerability. She was right about all of it. The bond meant sharing everything, not just the convenient parts. Meant trusting her to handle his worst moments without breaking. Meant being brave enough to be human. I'm sorry. The words came rough but genuine. You're right. All of it. I was wrong to shut you out. You were. She pulled back enough to meet his gaze, tears cutting tracks through grime on her face. Don't do it again. I'll try. Best I can promise. Good enough. She kissed him, desperate and claiming, and Cole felt something in his chest finally settle. Home. Partnership. The thing he'd been searching for in all the wrong places. When they separated, half the coalition was watching with expressions ranging from amused to uncomfortable. Strand smirked, insufferable in knowing. About damn time you two figured that out. Now can we maybe deal with the aftermath of warfare before you traumatize the troops further with public affection? The aftermath took 3 days. Counting dead, treating wounded, securing prisoners, beginning diplomatic process of figuring out what 4 allied pacts meant for regional politics. The casualties were heavy. 18 coalition wolves dead, 34 wounded seriously enough to require extended recovery. Every pack had lost people. Every alpha carried the weight of those deaths. But they'd won. Korsakov was shattered, leadership dead, forces scattered. The mercenary pack would rebuild eventually, but not here, not threatening this region. They'd learned the cost of underestimating unified opposition. The Regional Council convened emergency session to address the unprecedented alliance. 4 alphas sitting together, presenting unified front, demanding recognition of their coalition as legitimate political entity. The council elders hadn't seen anything like it in living memory. Pacts didn't ally. They competed, fought, merged through conquest, or disbanded through defeat. Cooperation was theory, not practice. Until now. The questioning took hours. What did the coalition want? How would leadership work? What prevented them from dominating smaller packs through combined strength? Every concern about power and precedent and the shifting balance of regional politics. Strand spoke for them, charismatic and brilliant, building argument that coalition served everyone's interests. Unified defense against external threats, economic cooperation benefiting all parties, precedent for resolving conflicts through diplomacy instead of warfare. The council deliberated for 2 days while coalition alphas waited with forced patience. Finally, the ruling came, not what anyone expected. The alliance was recognized, but with conditions. No single alpha could command all 4 packs. Leadership must be shared, distributed, balanced to prevent any one territory from dominating. Regular audits, oversight, checks against the concentration of power, and a new position, unprecedented in wolf politics. Lunar Counselor, advisor to all alphas, mediator in disputes, voice of reason when pride threatened cooperation. The position would go to Ash Remington, provided she accepted. Cole felt her shock through the bond, mirroring his own. The council had done research, had learned about her father's sacrifice, had seen her tactical brilliance during the battle, had recognized that she was key to the coalition's success, that her ability to see patterns and build bridges had made victory possible. They were offering her power, recognition, the thing she'd craved her whole life, validation that she mattered beyond bloodline or bond. She looked at Cole, question in her eyes. He nodded, giving permission she didn't need, but appreciated anyway. This was her choice, her future. He wouldn't take that from her through possessive instinct or fear of what it meant. Ash stood, addressed the council with steady voice. I accept, on conditions of my own. This position serves all packs equally. No favoritism, no manipulation. I advise based on evidence and analysis, not politics or personal relationships. And if any alpha, including my mate, tries to use me as leverage or weapon, I resign immediately and expose them publicly. The council agreed. The coalition had its counselor. Ash had her voice. Cole watched her claim the position with pride and fear mixed together. This changed everything, made her even more visible, more valuable, more of a target. But it also gave her the platform she'd earned, the recognition she deserved. He'd just have to learn to live with the terror. The mate ceremony happened a week later, after the wounded had stabilized and the immediate crisis had passed. Cole had wanted to wait longer, give her time to settle into her new role, make sure she was choosing him rather than feeling obligated by the bond. Ash had shut that down with characteristic directness. She'd almost died twice. He'd almost died at least once. They'd faced enemies, built coalition, survived impossible odds. Waiting for the perfect moment was just another way of running scared, and she was done with both of them being cowards. So they did it properly. Traditional ceremony, pack witnesses, formal claims and vows that made the bond official in ways that mattered to wolf culture. Strand attended, representing Iron Ridge, and grinning like he'd personally arranged the whole thing. Chen and Moonwater sent delegations, political gesture that reinforced coalition unity. Cole stood before his pack in formal attire that felt uncomfortable after years of tactical gear and comfortable distance. Ash faced him in simple dress that somehow made her look more dangerous than any weapon. The pack surrounded them, witnesses to vulnerability he'd spent a decade avoiding. Evelyn officiated, her voice carrying weight of tradition and genuine warmth. The second beta had softened toward Ash after watching her coordinate battle intelligence, had admitted privately to Cole that maybe she'd been wrong about the mate bond being weakness. Maybe it was exactly the strength he'd needed all along. The vows were traditional, ancient words about partnership and protection, and choosing each other despite knowing the cost. Cole spoke them with rough sincerity, meaning every syllable in ways he hadn't thought possible months ago. Ash responded with steady conviction, claiming him as publicly as he claimed her. When the ceremony ended, the bond sang between them with recognition deeper than instinct. Mate, partner, the other half of something he hadn't known was incomplete. The celebration lasted into the night, packs mixing with tentative friendship, warriors sharing stories and scars, the beginning of something that might actually last. Cole stood on the ramparts later, watching the gathering, feeling the weight of leadership settling into new configuration. Ash found him there, moving into his space with comfortable intimacy that still surprised him. You okay? Thinking about the future, what we built here, whether it survives the next crisis. His arm wrapped around her automatically, pulling her close. Whether I can be what you need long-term instead of just crisis response. You'll figure it out. We'll figure it out. She leaned into him, solid and real and utterly certain. Besides, I didn't choose you because you were easy. I chose you because you're worth the effort, even when you're being difficult. I'm always difficult, I know. She smiled, affection and exasperation mixed. It's part of your charm. That and the brooding warrior thing. Very attractive, if you're into emotionally unavailable military types with trauma. Are you into that? Apparently. Must be something wrong with my judgment. They stood together, watching the celebration, the packs they'd united, the future they'd fought for. It wasn't perfect, would probably never be perfect, but it was theirs, built through honesty and blood and the stubborn refusal to quit. Below them, Strand was telling war stories to a mixed audience of Blackwood and Iron Ridge warriors, making them laugh, building connections, doing the social leadership Cole had never mastered. But Strand also caught Cole's eye, raised a glass in salute, acknowledgement between brothers who'd earned respect through combat. "Your friend's good at that, making people feel included." Ash observed Strand with analytical appreciation. "You could learn from him." "Probably." Cole considered that, considered growth he'd resisted for years. "But that requires admitting I don't know everything. Admitting I need help. That's uncomfortable." "Get comfortable." She poked his ribs, gentle but pointed. "Because I'm going to keep pushing you to be better, to be more than the Iceman. That's what partners do. They make you grow even when growth is painful." "Sounds terrible." "It is, but it's also worth it." He kissed her then, slow and claiming, tasting truth in the contact. She was right. About all of it. Growth was painful and necessary, and the only way forward. He'd spent a decade frozen, convinced that ice was safer than fire. But fire kept you alive. Ice just delayed the inevitable. The months that followed tested the coalition in ways warfare hadn't. Peace required different skills than combat, required communication and compromise and patience with wolves who'd been rivals for generations. Disputes arose over territory boundaries, hunting rights, resource distribution, all the boring, practical details that mattered more than glory. Ash mediated most of them, building reputation as fair counselor who favored evidence over politics. Some resented her youth, others questioned her authority, but she handled each challenge with steady competence that gradually won respect even from skeptics. Cole supported her publicly and privately, learning to step back when his protective instincts wanted to solve her problems for her. Learning that trust meant letting her fight her own battles, even when watching was harder than fighting himself. 6 months after Korsakov's defeat, a threat emerged that tested everything they'd built. Victor Kane, the rogue leader Cole had captured during the first assault, escaped from custody, disappeared into the mountains with a handful of followers, leaving message that promised revenge. Cole's first instinct was to hunt him down, eliminate the threat with prejudice and overwhelming force. The old Cole would have done exactly that, would have tracked Victor through the wilderness and ended him without hesitation or mercy. But Ash pushed back, suggested alternative approach. Victor had lost his mate during Serena's betrayal, had been nursing grief and rage for decades. Killing him would just create a martyr, would reinforce the cycle of violence. Maybe there was another way. Cole resisted. Victor was threat, plain and simple. Threats got eliminated. That was survival. But Strand agreed with Ash. Chen and Moonwater concurred. The coalition counselor had analyzed the situation, presented alternatives, and 3 out of 4 alphas thought she was right. Democracy in action. Cole hated it. He went anyway, tracked Victor to his mountain hideout, brought small team instead of overwhelming force, found the rogue leader living in cave, barely surviving, more broken than dangerous. They talked. Actually talked. 2 wolves who'd both lost people to Serena's manipulation. Victor's mate had been named Isabella. She'd died in the attack, pregnant with their first child. Victor had blamed Cole for bringing the enemy into their midst, for being weak enough to fall for lies. But decade of rage had burned out, leaving just ash and regret. Victor wasn't proud of what he'd become, wasn't proud of nearly killing Ash, of working with Korsakov, of betraying everything he'd once believed. He was just tired. Tired of hating, tired of running, tired of being defined by loss. Cole made an offer: surrender, face justice, serve the pack instead of fighting it. 15 years of service, helping rebuild what violence had destroyed. Not freedom, but purpose. Chance at redemption instead of dying angry and alone. Victor considered for a long time, finally accepted. Returned to Blackwood in restraints, facing consequence, but also possibility. The council sentenced him exactly as Cole proposed. 15 years. Supervised service. Chance to earn back what he'd lost through actions instead of violence. Some called it mercy, others called it weakness. Cole called it growth. Learning that strength included knowing when not to kill, when offering choice served better than enforcing will. Ash called it progress, said he was learning to think strategically instead of reactively. He threatened to show her exactly how reactive he could be. She laughed and kissed him and called him impossible. He was starting to think impossible was a compliment. A year after the ceremony, Ash came to him with news that changed everything again. She'd discovered she was pregnant, already 2 months along before the symptoms had become undeniable. Lunar bloodline would continue, child born to union between packs, symbol of Coalition's future. Cole's first reaction was terror. Bone-deep, visceral fear that he'd fail this child the way he'd failed 43 wolves, that his mistakes would cost innocent life, that history would repeat with devastating precision. Ash saw the panic, felt it through their bond, and handled it with the directness he'd learned to appreciate. Sat him down, made him talk through every fear, every worst-case scenario, every trauma that said he wasn't fit to be father. Then she reminded him of something he'd forgotten. He wasn't alone anymore, wasn't carrying everything by himself. She was here. Strand was here. The Coalition was here. Extended family built through choice and blood and stubborn determination to be better than their worst moments. The child would have a pack, would have protection and community and love from more than just biological parents, would grow up knowing that strength included vulnerability, that leadership required listening, that being broken didn't mean being useless, would grow up better than they had, because they'd make sure of it. Cole cried. Actually cried, tears cutting tracks through scarred face, releasing grief and fear and hope he hadn't let himself feel in 15 years. Ash held him through it, steady and patient, proof that showing weakness didn't mean breaking, meant being human, and human was enough. The child was born 7 months later, arriving slightly early, but healthy and strong. Daughter, small and fierce and perfect. They named her Isabella Marie Mackenzie. Isabella for Victor's lost mate, gesture of forgiveness and healing. Marie for Ash's mother, who'd hidden her daughter's heritage to keep her safe. The Coalition celebrated like the birth mattered to everyone, because it did. Symbol of their unity, proof that yesterday's enemies could become today's family. Victor, serving his sentence in pack maintenance, asked permission to see the child. Cole granted it, watched the broken rogue leader hold infant with reverence and tears. "This is what we lost, what Serena destroyed." Victor's voice cracked. "Thank you for letting me see what could have been. It's what could still be." Cole surprised himself with the words. "You've got 12 years left on your sentence. Serve them with honor. Maybe at the end, you find someone who helps you heal instead of staying trapped in what you lost." Victor nodded, handed the child back, left with something in his expression that looked almost like peace. The months that followed tested the Coalition in ways warfare hadn't. Peace required different skills than combat, required communication and compromise and patience with wolves who'd been rivals for generations. Disputes arose over territory boundaries, hunting rights, resource distribution, all the boring, practical details that mattered more than glory. Ash mediated most of them, building reputation as fair counselor who favored evidence over politics. Some resented her youth, others questioned her authority, but she handled each challenge with steady competence that gradually won respect even from skeptics. Cole supported her publicly and privately, learning to step back when his protective instincts wanted to solve her problems for her. Learning that trust meant letting her fight her own battles, even when watching was harder than fighting himself. 3 years after the Coalition formed, it was still standing. Not perfect, not without problems, but functioning, adapting, proving that cooperation was possible when the alternative was death. Cole had learned to lead with warmth mixed into strength, had learned that his pack responded better to respect than fear, that showing emotion didn't compromise authority. Still wasn't natural, probably never would be, but he tried, and trying mattered. Ash had built reputation as counselor, who could solve seemingly impossible disputes, had earned voice that went beyond her bond to Cole, beyond her father's sacrifice. She was respected for her mind, her integrity, her unwillingness to be influenced by politics or pressure. Strand visited regularly, friendship deepening between alphas who understood each other in ways few others could. They argued strategy and swapped war stories and competed over who could make their packs more efficient. It was rivalry without hatred, competition without resentment. Brotherhood earned through combat and maintained through respect. The night Isabella turned 2, Cole stood on the ramparts again. Same place he'd stood 4 years ago, watching Ash train young wolves and refusing to acknowledge the bond forming between them. Same view, same mountains, same territory. But everything had changed. Ash joined him, moving into space beside him with comfortable intimacy. Below, their daughter played with other pack children, supervised by warriors who would die to protect any of them. Coalition had created extended family, support system neither Cole nor Ash had known growing up. You thinking about the past? She read him easily after years together. Thinking about how much I've changed. How much we've changed. Whether I would have believed any of this was possible 4 years ago. He pulled her close, breathing in her scent. I was so certain love was weakness, so convinced isolation was strength. I was wrong about everything. Not everything. You were right about protecting the pack, about duty mattering. You just learned that duty includes taking care of yourself, not just everyone else. You taught me that. We taught each other. She smiled, resting her head against his shoulder. You taught me I was allowed to be seen, that my voice mattered, that being invisible wasn't safety, just slower death. They stood together, watching their daughter, their pack, their coalition. The future stretched ahead, uncertain and promising. There would be more threats, more challenges, more moments when survival seemed unlikely. But they'd face them together, with allies, with family, with the stubborn determination that had kept them alive this long. Cole Mackenzie had learned he didn't have to be the Iceman, could be human, could be flawed, could be partner instead of lone warrior. The learning had been painful, necessary, worth every difficult step. Ash Remington had learned she didn't have to be invisible, could claim her voice, could demand recognition, could be force instead of shadow. The claiming had been terrifying, essential, worth every risk. Together, they were more than the sum of their individual scars, were proof that broken people could heal without forgetting what broke them, were evidence that love wasn't weakness, partnership wasn't vulnerability, and sometimes the strongest thing you could do was admit you needed someone. The bond sang between them, no longer question or doubt, but certainty. Mate, partner, home. Below, Isabella laughed, bright and clear, sound carrying hope for future neither parent had thought possible. Above, stars emerged in the darkening sky, ancient and steady, witnessing the small drama of wolves trying to be better than their worst moments. The story that started with claiming born of desperation had become something neither expected. Partnership built on honesty, love earned through trust, family chosen instead of just accepted. It wasn't perfect, would never be perfect, but it was real, and it was theirs, and that was enough. More than enough. Everything.